Have you ever woken up with the feeling that your mind is wrapped in a thick fog, struggling to recall a simple name or the appointment you wrote down just yesterday? Many believe that these small lapses are merely inevitable scars of time, a toll that everyone over 60 is forced to pay. However, what the most advanced science of longevity reveals is something much deeper and, at the same time, alarming. Your memory might not be failing because of age, but because your brain is being literally suffocated by toxic waste that was not removed during the night. Imagine your mind is a magnificent house where the cleaning service stopped showing up. Trash accumulates in the hallways until the doors no longer open. This ignored danger is silent, invisible, and happens while you sleep, turning your rest into a lost battlefield. At this very moment, there is a fascinating biological mechanism working inside your skull, a kind of molecular janitor that should be purifying your neurons of all the impurities accumulated during the day. However, a recent and disturbing discovery shows that a common nighttime habit, which you probably repeat without suspicion, is turning off the switch of this vital brain sanitation system. By interrupting this essential cleanup, you allow dangerous proteins to permanently settle in the areas responsible for your most cherished memories and your logical reasoning capacity. What is at stake here is not just a silly oversight, but the maintenance of your autonomy, your dignity, and your freedom to decide your own destiny. If you want to protect your lucidity and prevent your story from being prematurely erased, you need to understand how a simple error before bed may be sealing the future of your mental health. Often, we accept forgetfulness as an inevitable heritage of aging, a kind of occupancy tax that the body charges for every decade lived. However, this passive acceptance hides a frightening reality. Millions of people over 60 suffer today from a cognitive decline that could have been mitigated if they had protected their nighttime biochemical environment. The subject is ignored because the damage is not immediate. It occurs on a microscopic scale, molecule by molecule, night after night of poorly utilized sleep. When the clear signs of mental confusion or recent memory loss finally appear, the accumulation of toxic waste in the brain has already reached critical levels, making the recovery of autonomy a Herculean task. Understanding that lucidity is not just genetic luck, but active biological maintenance is the central pillar for anyone who wishes to age with full power and clarity. As we cross the threshold of 60, the body's biology undergoes profound structural changes that make the brain much more vulnerable to external aggression and internal cleaning failures. The blood-brain barrier, which acts as a protective filter against harmful substances, naturally becomes more permeable, allowing inflammation to settle more easily into nervous tissue. Additionally, the natural production of melatonin, the hormone that orchestrates the sleep rhythm, enters a sharp decline, resulting in more fragmented and superficial nights. This change is not merely an inconvenience, it is a critical failure in the window of opportunity for cellular repair. Without deep and continuous sleep, the gears of neuronal renewal begin to stall, creating an environment ripe for small failures to turn into permanent damage, robbing the mental agility that defines our independence and our real quality of life. It is fundamental to understand that the brain has an exclusive sanitation system known as the glymphatic system, which operates almost entirely while we are immersed in the deepest sleep. During this stage, neurons curiously shrink in size, opening channels through which cerebrospinal fluid flows like a purifying river, washing away toxic proteins such as beta amyloid and tau. These substances are natural byproducts of daily activity, but if not properly expelled, they act as a biological rust that destroys synapses. In aging, this natural brainwash capacity is already naturally reduced, which makes any external interference even more catastrophic. When we neglect the quality of rest, we are essentially locking the trash inside our brain cells. The result is chronic inflammation that precedes neurodegenerative diseases, transforming what should be a healing process into a cycle of silent destruction that severely compromises our future memory. The central conflict we face is not an inevitable biological fatality, but rather the collision between our ancestral physiology and a deeply underestimated modern habit that fragments the architecture of deep sleep. Many of us believe that chronic fatigue upon awakening or daily minor memory lapses are just signs of accumulated stress when, in truth, we are facing a silent error that turns off the brain's toxin drainage system. This saboteur, often disguised as a moment of nighttime relaxation, such as prolonged exposure to blue light or the ingestion of substances that promise sleep but sabotage its depth, prevents us from reaching the slow wave phases necessary for complete neuronal purification. Without this critical stage, the brain remains dirty, inflamed, and unable to consolidate memories, creating a dangerous chasm between who we are and who we will become. What is truly at stake in this conflict is your functional freedom and absolute command over your own life story. When we allow this harmful habit to persist after 60, we are passively accepting a drastic reduction in our autonomy and the real possibility of becoming dependent on others for the simplest daily tasks. Memory is the foundation of our dignity and power. Without it, we lose the ability to manage our finances, recognize loved ones, and even maintain personal safety. The fear of a living death, where the body remains present but the mind fades away, must serve as the trigger for an immediate and necessary strategic change. Ignoring the protection of the nighttime biochemical environment is choosing the path of vulnerability, while acting now to eliminate this saboteur is taking back the reins of long-lasting cognitive health. The human brain, despite its extraordinary complexity, works similarly to a large metropolis that needs an efficient sanitation system to avoid collapse. For decades, science wondered how the most active organ in the body eliminated its metabolic waste, since it does not have the lymphatic vessels common to the rest of the organism. The answer came with the discovery of the glymphatic system, a specialized network of channels that uses the space between brain cells to pump purifying fluids. During the day, your neurons are too busy processing information to perform a deep cleaning. It is only during slow-wave sleep that this system enters maximum operation, removing the toxins that, if accumulated, can sabotage your memory. Without this daily maintenance, the cognitive structure begins to fail silently, compromising the lucidity you value so much. During the deepest stage of rest, a nearly magical biological phenomenon occurs. Glial cells, which support your neurons, physically shrink by up to 60% of their original size. This shrinkage is not a sign of weakness, but a strategic maneuver that expands the interstitial space, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flow with renewed force. Think of it as a controlled flood that carries away all the molecular waste generated by the previous day's mental effort. This nightly irrigation is the only effective way to prevent protein residues from becoming permanent deposits of biological dirt. When you reach this level of depth in sleep, your brain is, quite literally, washing itself. Ensuring that this process occurs without interruption is the fundamental first step for anyone who wishes to maintain a sharp mind and an independent life after 60. Unfortunately, for the audience over 60, the efficiency of this nighttime janitor tends to naturally decrease due to the structural changes of aging. Fluid pulses become less vigorous, and deep sleep periods become increasingly shorter and more fragmented. This reduction in self-cleaning capacity means that the margin of error for harmful habits becomes practically non-existent. If a young person can recover from a night of poor sleep, the elderly do not possess the same biological resilience. The accumulation of metabolic trash that is not removed today becomes tomorrow's inflammation, accelerating the decline of executive functions. Therefore, understanding the mechanics of the glymphatic system is transformative. You stop seeing sleep as simple passive rest and start seeing it as a mandatory technical maintenance session to protect your intellectual heritage. The biggest saboteur of this vital system is a habit many consider harmless: exposure to intense artificial light or the consumption of sedative substances shortly before bed. Whether browsing social media or seeking relaxation in a glass of wine, these choices emit contradictory biological signals that prevent the brain from diving into the deep phases of cleaning. I would like to pause here to recognize your dedication to learning about your own health. If you value your autonomy and wish to continue receiving strategic guidance like this, I invite you to comment below about the quality of your awakening and to subscribe to the channel to strengthen our longevity community. Your participation is essential so that we can take this knowledge to more people seeking to age with power. Now let's detail how these habits physically assault your neurons. Blue light emitted by cell phone and television screens acts as a switch that turns off the production of melatonin, the master hormone of our nighttime biology. Without adequate melatonin levels, the brain never receives the official command to begin the great glymphatic sweep. In the elderly, whose hormonal production is already naturally reduced, this external interference is devastating, as it keeps the mind in a state of chemical wakefulness even when the body seems asleep. Similarly, alcohol, although it causes apparent drowsiness, fragments sleep architecture and inhibits the slow wave stage, which is precisely when toxin drainage is most intense. The result is a night of superficial rest that fails to purify the nervous tissue, leaving you vulnerable to the accumulation of proteins that corrode memory and destroy your long-term mental clarity. To illustrate the impact of these choices, consider the difference between two common profiles in maturity. We have the exhausted active who ignores sleep hygiene and believes that sleeping little is a sign of productivity. Over time, he begins to lose the thread of simple conversations and feels a constant mental fog that prevents him from planning his future. In contrast, the night strategist protects her sleep as if it were her most valuable treasure, avoiding screens and bright lights before bed. A real example is that of a gentleman who, by eliminating the habit of watching tense news in bed, regained in just a few weeks the ability to remember names and perform complex mental calculations. This simple change allowed his brain to complete the cleaning cycle, proving that the recovery of mental sharpness is within reach of those who decide to act preventively. When the failure in brain cleaning becomes chronic, the brain begins to accumulate toxic proteins known as beta amyloid and tau, which are the physical precursors of forgetfulness. In a healthy system, these residues are eliminated daily, but under the influence of sabotaging habits, they begin to form sticky plaques that settle between neurons. These plaques function as physical barriers that interrupt the brain's electrical communication, causing you to forget common words or where you kept important objects. Over time, this metabolic dirt not only obstructs information pathways, but also triggers a persistent inflammatory response that attacks healthy nerve cells. After 60, this inflammation is the fuel that accelerates the transition from normal memory lapses to severe neurodegenerative conditions that can steal your identity and your life story. The damage caused by the accumulation of these toxins reaches its peak in the destruction of synapses, which are the connection points where memories are stored and retrieved. Imagine that each synapse is a vital bridge in your network of thoughts. When the glymphatic system fails, these bridges begin to collapse under the weight of molecular debris and inflammation. The loss of these connections is what generates the feeling of mental confusion and the growing difficulty in processing new information or learning new skills. The brain, overwhelmed by its own trash, loses the plasticity necessary to adapt and heal itself. Therefore, the preservation of lucidity depends less on repetitive mental exercises and much more on the rigorous protection of your nighttime biochemical environment. Without a clean environment, no neuron can function at its maximum capacity, and your functional autonomy ends up being sacrificed. To reverse this scenario and shield your brain, it is necessary to implement what we call a cognitive hygiene protocol. The first step is the decompression ritual, which should start at least 2 hours before you go to bed. This involves a drastic reduction in the house's brightness, using warm, soft yellow bulbs that do not assault your natural melatonin production. By creating this dim environment, you are sending a clear message to your glymphatic system that the cleaning shift should be prepared. Additionally, establishing a fixed time for the day's last meal prevents the body from diverting energy to heavy digestion during the period when it should be focused on neuronal purification. These practices are not just wellness advice, They are technical interventions that guarantee the successful completion of the brain detoxification cycle, effectively protecting your memory against decline. The beauty of this approach is that the brain possesses a remarkable capacity for recovery when ideal conditions are restored, even after 60 or 70 years. By adopting these changes, you begin to dissipate the morning fog and feel a renewal in your capacity for concentration and reasoning. The improvement in deep sleep quality acts as a shield against dementia, actively reducing inflammation levels and allowing surviving synapses to strengthen. You will notice that your readiness for social and physical activities increases considerably as a clean mind generates a more energized and motivated body. The power to age with dignity is in your hands by transforming the act of sleeping into a conscious neurological defense strategy. It is not about accepting fragility, but about exercising control over your own physiology to ensure a future of independence and unshakable lucidity. Finally, it is vital to know how to differentiate normal aging from a pathological process caused by neglect of brain cleaning. It is perfectly common to occasionally forget where you left your keys or take a bit longer to recall a movie title. These are signs of naturally slower processing. However, getting lost on familiar paths or forgetting the function of everyday objects are critical alerts that the accumulation of toxins has exceeded your brain's safety limit. By monitoring these signs and rigorously protecting your glymphatic system, you ensure that your mind remains in the zone of health and wisdom, far from the shadows of permanent mental confusion. Your old age does not have to be a period of decline and fear, but rather a phase of intellectual mastery and control, where every night of purifying sleep is a direct investment in your freedom. Carlos always took pride in his mental agility, but upon turning 68, he began to notice words slipping from the tip of his tongue with unsettling frequency. He ignored the fact that his nights were interrupted by the bright light of his tablet, believing that fatigue was just part of getting older, until a serious financial error made him realize the danger. In contrast, we have the example of Regina, 72, who decided to transform her bedroom into a true sanctuary of darkness and silence. By eliminating screens 2 hours before bed and adopting a deep relaxation ritual, she not only regained the clarity to read dense books, but also felt a renewal in her short-term memory that many would consider impossible at her age. These trajectories show that decline is not a one-way street, but a daily choice between neglect and care. We need to understand that brain aging is not a random event or a stroke of biological bad luck that suddenly hits us as we cross a certain decade. On the contrary, the health of our mind is the direct and cumulative reflection of small habits that silently add up over years, building a foundation of resilience or a scenario of extreme vulnerability. Cognitive decline is a progressive and invisible process where each sabotaged night of sleep acts as a brick removed from the solid structure of our functional autonomy. I would like to recognize you who have come this far seeking knowledge to protect your family. If this content makes sense, share it with those you love. Understanding that the body possesses its own intelligence allows us to stop being passive victims of time and become the conscious architects of our longevity, acting with wisdom and active prevention. Although the prospect of brain toxin accumulation may seem like a grim and irreversible verdict, modern science brings a message of deep hope and renewal. It is fundamental to understand that your brain is not a static structure, but a dynamic organ that maintains its plasticity and recovery capacity even at advanced ages, provided it receives the proper biological support. Even if you have neglected your sleep for years, starting today to protect the glymphatic system can interrupt the inflammation cycle and provide immediate relief for overloaded neurons. We are not talking about complex interventions, but simple changes in your nightly routine that generate a real and measurable impact on your mental clarity. Old age does not have to be about fragility. It can be strengthened through strategic action, ensuring that you maintain total control over your life, autonomy, and your most precious thoughts. If we choose to ignore our biology's urgent call and allow the brain cleaning system to remain inactive night after night, the consequences for our quality of life will be inevitable and severe. The persistent accumulation of metabolic debris results not just in isolated forgetfulness, but in a profound cognitive decline that culminates in the loss of independence and the need for constant supervision by others. Imagine the emotional weight of no longer being able to manage your own home, becoming a burden to family members due to mental confusion, or facing frequent hospitalizations due to medication errors. Without the correct intervention, the future holds a scenario of vulnerability, where your identity fragments in the face of the inability to process the present. Conversely, those who act preventively protect their command over the world, ensuring an old age marked by sharpness, autonomy, and the pleasure of remaining the protagonist. Perhaps the most surprising and counterintuitive fact that modern neuroscience has revealed to us is that your brain literally needs to shrink so that you can continue being who you are. Many people believe that brain vitality depends on keeping neurons always active and robust. But the truth is that if they do not reduce their physical volume during deep sleep to open space for glymphatic washing, cell death becomes inevitable. Another frequently ignored point is that even a single night of sleep interrupted by electronic device lights can raise toxic protein levels in proportions that the body takes days to compensate for. It is not just about resting, but about allowing a nightly biological metamorphosis that is the most neglected item on the list of dementia prevention. This revelation changes the game. Protecting memory requires less mental effort and much more strategic physiological discipline. To take back control of your neurological health today, it is fundamental to adopt simple and immediate actions that allow your glymphatic system to operate at maximum power. Start by observing the signals your body emits right upon awakening. If you feel persistent mental fog or irritability without an apparent cause, it is a clear indication that nighttime brain cleaning was interrupted. Begin your cognitive hygiene protocol by turning off cell phone and television screens at least 90 minutes before bed, replacing them with light reading or soft music in a dim environment. Avoid heavy meals after 7 p.m., allowing your metabolism to focus exclusively on cellular repair and not on digestion. These changes, though they seem small, create the ideal biochemical conditions for your brain to purify itself, ensuring that you wake up with a sharp mind, a protected memory, and fully preserved autonomy. On this journey, we understood that preserving your lucidity is not a game of luck, but the direct result of strategic brain cleaning that occurs while you sleep. We learned that the glymphatic system is the true guardian of your story, and protecting it from sabotaging habits is the greatest act of power you can exercise over your aging. From now on, observe each awakening as a thermometer of your health, and remember that small nighttime decisions will shape your clarity in the decades to come. Are you willing to sacrifice a fleeting habit to ensure a life of independence and recognition? Reflect on your story and comment below on what you will change today in your routine. If this knowledge brought hope, subscribe to the channel and share this video with those you wish to see aging with dignity. Your memory is your greatest asset. Protect it with awareness.